We're going to be reading Chapter 7 of Stop the Chaos, How to Get Control of Your Life by Beating Alcohol and Drugs by Alan A. Tighe. He has MS and CCDCR. The 12 Steps. We admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. We come to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. We made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. We were entirely ready for God to remove all these defects of character. We humbly asked Him to remove all of our shortcomings. We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. We made a direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. We continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. We sought, through prayer and meditation, to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will and the power to carry it out. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to addicts and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. This is the third step prayer. God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me, and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of all the bondage of self, that I may be better to do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may be witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. Amen. Coping with using urges. An urge or craving to use alcohol or other drugs is normal physical and emotional reaction to stopping alcohol and other drug use. Our bodies and minds have adapted to receiving a regular supply of chemicals. We stop taking our chemicals, our bodies and minds still want them. When we have a craving, we experience physical symptoms. Our heart may beat faster, or we may salivate when we watching a beer commercial. We can encounter cravings without warning, or by some trigger, such as seeing our drug of choice or driving past our dealer's house. When we stop our chemical use, urges to use our drugs can be frequent and intense. As we focus on developing a lifestyle free of alcohol and other drugs and based on personal growth, cravings become fewer and further between, but can still occur. Most urges are short-lived and last no longer than a few minutes. This means that easy access to drugs or alcohol can be dangerous. It only takes a moment to walk to the refrigerator, open a beer, and start drinking again. When an impulse act, our dependency has been reignited, and we find ourselves deeply into our addiction again. But if we don't have drugs or alcohol nearby, the urge may pass before we can get to the liquor store or have a chance to contact our drug dealer. Careful planning is the key. If we have a plan outlining how we'll handle these situations, we can save our recovery. When life becomes stressful or if something triggers our emotions and memories, we may return to chemical use. Euphoric recall and magical thinking are methods we use to rationalize or excuse a return to using. Euphoric recall refers to romancing our past use. It sure was great at Bob's party that night. I really got wasted. Gosh, those were great days. I sure haven't had that much fun since I stopped drugging. Sobriety is boring. Euphoric recall is the process of thinking favorably about our past using experiences. Our memory becomes very selective. When we think about how good it was to use and we forget or minimize the consequences of our actions, we miss the excitement of the old days. Magical or delusional thinking is planning for controlled future use. Barbara's husband is going to be gone for a week on a business trip. She remembers many times she secretly drunk while he was gone. She starts to plan how she could drink again and stop before he returns. Magical thinking is when we believe that social use or controlling our use might be an option. We question whether we're dependent on chemicals. We start to believe that we may be able to use, one more time and then quit before suffering any of the consequences. We may be so caught up in the thought of using again that we forget about the past consequences of our use. We delude or fool ourselves into believing we can control our chemical use. We deny our powerlessness over addiction. One problem in dealing with urges is mistakenly making the situation worse rather than better. If an urge lasts longer than a few minutes, we may be doing something to prolong its effect. We intensify our urges by focusing on euphoric recall or magical thinking, or by putting ourselves in high-risk situations that trigger more intense thoughts. We need to challenge euphoric recall and magical thinking immediately. Early intervention is the key. When we have an urge to use, we can take the following steps. Try to short-circuit the thinking by challenging the using thoughts within the first 10 seconds. We should think about what would happen if we were to follow through and use again. We can plan for these occasions by creating a thought sequence that describes the worst circumstance or consequence of past chemical use. How did we feel emotionally, physically? What was it like to face our families, our employers? This is called thinking the drink or drug through, or playing the tape through to the end. It puts us back into contact with the reality of the consequence of our use. It contradicts addictive thinking. Bev had to work late again. She left the office tired and angry. A memory from her old using days flashed in her mind. She remembered that stopping by her favorite bar for a few drinks had always made her feel better. The urge was so strong she could taste the drink. Bev knew how to handle the urge. She carried a card in her purse that described what happened the last time she had a drink. She read through it and remembered that the last time she had gone to that bar, she lost control of her drinking and ended up in jail for a DUI. She thought of how embarrassed she was when her mother had to bail her out. Bev didn't want her name in the paper again, and she decided to go home. Remove ourselves from any person, place, or situation that may have triggered the using thoughts. We can know what our urges and our triggers are. We don't have to be afraid to leave an uncomfortable situation. We can't be concerned about what others may think. Our sobriety comes first. Contact someone and talk about how we're feeling. Using thoughts are normal and not a sign of weakness. Calling someone and talking about what we've encountered can relax, dilute, soften, or end the urge. Other people with chemical dependency have been there and know exactly what we're experiencing. They know we're not weak. They understand the need for talking about intense feelings. The object is to lessen the severity of the urge so that we can cope with it. It may not go away completely. If it reoccurs, we need to relax. Start at the beginning and calmly challenge the thought again. Exercise. To challenge euphoric recall or positive, using memories from the past, create a specific thought sequence about specific past events. Describe the most severe consequence of your past use. This includes events, devastating feelings, people you hurt, legal problems, or relationship issues. When challenging euphoric recall, you need to be completely honest. Write down what really happened when you used. Magical thinking says that you could use one more time, that you could somehow control your chemical use. When you start to have this type of thinking, consider how using again would play out in reality. You might imagine that using again would be okay, but what would really happen? Think the drink or drug through, or play the tape through to the end. Write down a sequence of what would happen if you started to use again. When we start to think about using, we can play out the sequence of what has happened in the past and what would happen in the future. We need to live in the honesty and reality of what our lives were like when we used chemicals. Just as we have dreams about different aspects of our lives, we also may dream about using chemicals again. The disturbing thing about the dream is the reality of it. We snap back to consciousness, startled and shaken. Many times we believe that the dream was real and that we've somehow lost our sobriety because they seem so real. These experiences can be frightening, even for someone with a long period of sobriety. Joan jumped up out of sound sleep. She dreamed that she had returned to using drugs. The excitement of the drug using and yet the shame about her failure to stay sober were intense. Now that she was awake, she wondered whether it was actually a dream. It seemed so real. The using dream shows us what's going on in our heads. when awake. We're aware of the possibility of using thoughts and can cope with them. But when asleep, these dreams become powerful messengers of the strength of our dependency, our feelings of shame, our powerlessness, or our fears about relapsing to chemical use. It is helpful to realize that using dreams are common and not necessarily a sign that we will relapse. Remember, urges will be brief unless we do something to prolong them. We can talk to others and challenge the thinking immediately. Using thoughts and dreams become less frequent with time. We need to be patient. Urging and using dreams do not necessarily mean we're doing something wrong in our recovery. Using dreams and urges to chemicals are normal. They are part of the mindset of the person with a chemical dependency. We're going to take a break.